Some men make noise when they've been hurt. They argue at the dinner table, they send the long email, they bring it up again 6 months later at a family barbecue, when everyone just wants to eat their burgers and pretend the year went fine. I am not that man. My name is Lawrence Beaumont. I am 58 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the city of Edmonton, the kind of job where nobody at a dinner party asks you follow-up questions when you tell them what you do. I drive a 2011 Chevy Silverado with a busted passenger side speaker that plays everything at half volume, and a Tim Hortons travel mug permanently fused to the cup holder from a spill I never properly cleaned up. I eat the same breakfast every morning. 2 eggs, whole wheat, toast, black coffee, because I decided somewhere in my late 40s that a consistent morning was worth more than an interesting one. I also paid for 2 years of my son's master's degree at Dalhousie, $67,000 in total, tuition and living costs, transferred quietly into his account every semester, no strings and no announcements. He stood at his convocation dinner and gave a speech in front of 300 people, thanking everyone who believed in him. My name was not in it. I just sat there, clapped with everyone else, adjusted the collar on my good jacket, and I did not know that the most clarifying moment of my life was about 20 minutes away. Welcome to Dad's final revenge. Get comfortable. Every person in these stories believed they were the smartest one in the room. They were mistaken. Subscribe so you don't miss a story. My son, Connor, is 29 years old. He is sharp, organized, and has his mother's ability to walk into any room and immediately understand the social geometry of it. He got his undergraduate degree in environmental science at the University of Alberta, then was accepted into a graduate program in marine resource management at Dalhousie in Halifax. This was a good thing. I was proud of him. I am still proud of him, which is something I want to be clear about before I get into the rest of it, because what comes later could make it sound like I'm not, and that would be the wrong impression. His mother, my ex-wife Lorraine, and I separated when Connor was 16. 12 years ago, the marriage had run its course in the quiet, exhausting way that some marriages do, where there's no single catastrophic moment, just a slow accumulation of silences that eventually fills the whole house. We were civil about it. We are still civil about it. Lorraine remarried 4 years later, a man named Jeffrey, who works in commercial real estate in Calgary and has a wine fridge in his kitchen, and uses the word portfolio a lot in casual conversation. I don't dislike Jeffrey. He's been decent to Connor. He just exists in a register of life that I've never quite spoken fluently. Connor spent his high school years primarily with me in Edmonton. Summers in university, breaks with Lorraine and Jeffrey in Calgary. I know what that does over time. I watched it happen gradually. The way weather changes. You don't notice the temperature dropping by individual degrees. You just look up one day and realize it's winter. Connor had started measuring things. Not consciously, probably, but the Calgary house had a gym and a media room and a yard that looked like a magazine photo. My house had a finished basement I'd done myself one long weekend in October, a good barbecue, and the kind of quiet that you either find restful or oppressive depending on your age and mood. I'm aware of which side of that calculation Connor landed on somewhere in his mid-20s. He started explaining things to me around then, not unkindly, just carefully. The way you explain things to someone you're not entirely confident can keep up. He'd correct my pronunciation of things at dinner, not because I was wrong, exactly, but because there was a more current version. He'd summarize articles for me in the patient way of a person who suspects you haven't read them. My sister Beverly, who has known Connor since he was born and has never once sugarcoated a thing in her life, said to me one Sunday on the phone, "He manages you, Lawrence. He's been doing it for 2 years and you keep letting him." I told her she was being uncharitable. She said, "I know what I'm looking at." She was right. She usually is, which is why I sometimes wish she'd choose a less direct delivery method. When Connor was accepted to Dalhousie, he called me on a Tuesday evening. He was excited in the careful, composed way that he's excited about things. Contained enthusiasm, the emotional equivalent of a good firm handshake. I was genuinely happy for him. Halifax was far, but it was the right program and he'd worked hard to get there. "There's the question of funding," he said after a few minutes. "Tell me what you need," I said. Tuition is about $17,000 a year. Living costs in Halifax are, Connor. He stopped. Tell me the number, he told me. 2 years all in, roughly 67,000. I did not show the calculation on my face, because he couldn't see my face, but I ran it quickly in my head, against what I had in the registered education savings plan I'd opened when he was 4 years old, and added to every year since, and against the line of credit I'd take if it came short. It didn't come short. I'd been putting money aside for this since he was born, the same way I approach most things in my life. Quietly, consistently, without making an announcement about it. I can do it, I said. There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough to tell me he'd been prepared for a harder conversation. Dad. His voice shifted just slightly. Are you sure? I could apply for more scholarships. I could. Connor, I've been saving for this since you were 4 years old. I'd like to use it for what it was for. Another pause. Then, thank you. It came out small, genuine. He sounded, for a moment, like the kid who used to fall asleep in the back seat on long drives, and I'd carry him inside without waking him. And that was just a thing I did, because it was my job, and I liked doing my job. I transferred the first payment 3 weeks later, then every semester after that, quietly, the way I did everything. My partner Irene found me at the kitchen table that evening, with my laptop open and the bank confirmation on the screen. She stood in the doorway for a moment, reading the situation the way she reads most situations, accurately without needing it explained. You used the whole resp, she said. And a bit extra. Good, she said. That was it. That was Irene. 11 years together, and she still had the ability to say exactly what needed to be said in the exact minimum number of words. She went back to her book. I closed the laptop. I didn't know then what that money would mean by the end of June. Here's what I need you to understand before we get to the part where everything comes apart. Connor and I love each other. That's not in question. What's in question is a particular kind of blindness that grows in people who love you and have also quietly filed you under the wrong category. Connor had me categorized. I was blue-collar Lawrence, practical Lawrence, the man who knew how to replace a hot water heater and grill a steak properly and drive 14 hours without complaining. The comfortable version of a father. The useful one. What he didn't know, what I had never told him, was that I was also something else. I'll explain that in a moment. The convocation weekend was in late June. Halifax in late June is a specific kind of beautiful. The light comes off the harbor differently than anywhere I've been, at an angle that makes everything look like it's been lit for a photograph. Irene and I flew in on the Friday. Connor met us at the hotel lobby, looking exactly like what he was. A young man who had worked hard for 2 years and was about to receive something he'd earned. He introduced Irene warmly. He always did. Whatever else I could say about the situation, he was never unkind to Irene directly. Lorraine and Jeffrey arrived Saturday morning. We all had brunch together at a place near the waterfront, the 6 of us, which is a sentence that would have baffled me 15 years ago, but has become simply the arithmetic of modern families. Jeffrey ordered something with smoked salmon and talked about a property development in Kelowna. Lorraine was warm and relaxed in the way she is when she's in a social situation she's organized in her head beforehand. Connor sat between them, at ease, at home. I sat across the table and ate my eggs, and said the right things at the right times and watched my son look, just slightly, more comfortable on that side of the table than on mine. Irene's hand found my knee at some point without her looking up from her menu. She has good instincts. The convocation ceremony was at the Rebecca Cohn in the afternoon. Gowns, photographs, the particular academic solemnity of people who have spent 2 years studying something that matters and are now, officially, allowed to say so. Connor crossed the stage. I clapped too loud and didn't care. Irene was taking photographs. Even Jeffrey seemed genuinely pleased. The formal dinner was that evening. The program brought together graduating students, faculty, and a collection of people from industry and government who had funded or partnered with the university's research programs. Round tables, white linens, wine that was better than I expected. Connor's faculty supervisor, Dr. Whitmore, gave remarks. A few students spoke briefly. Then Connor was introduced as one of the graduating students who would offer a short address. He was good at it. He always had been, Even as a teenager, he could stand in front of people and speak, without looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. He thanked his supervisors. He thanked the program. He talked about the research, a resource mapping project in the Gulf of St. Lawrence that I'd listened to him describe for 2 years and had found consistently interesting and occasionally confusing. He was engaging and specific and clearly proud of the work, as he should have been. I also want to take a moment, he said, shifting slightly, to thank the people who made this possible personally. He looked out at the room. My mother has always pushed me to reach for something beyond what was comfortable. She showed me what ambition looks like up close, and I wouldn't be standing here without her example. Lorraine, 2 tables to my left, pressed her hand over her heart. Jeffrey put his arm around her. Jeffrey has been a model of what professional success can look like when you actually do the work, and I'm grateful for his guidance. Jeffrey nodded with the measured satisfaction of a man who feels he has been accurately assessed. And to my cohort, my supervisor, and everyone who has supported this journey, thank you. This is for all of you. Connor raised his glass. The room applauded. I sat very still. Irene didn't touch my hand this time. She just sat beside me, perfectly composed, her wine glass halfway to her lips, not moving. My sister Beverly, who had flown in from Winnipeg and was sitting to my right, turned her head toward me exactly once, and then turned back to face the front of the room. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say that the 3 of us didn't already know. I had transferred $67,000 to this evening. 2 years of his life, semester by semester, quietly, without announcement, without strings. My name was not mentioned, not once, not even indirectly. I picked up my water glass. I took a sip. I did not stand up. I did not make a scene. I was not going to make this the evening Connor's father humiliated him in front of his faculty and his peers and 300 strangers. That is not who I am, and I have spent 58 years being exactly who I am, and I was not about to change it for this. I did not notice, not then, that a man at the table behind me had set down his fork. Here's something I should explain, and I'll keep it brief because it still feels strange to talk about even now. 22 years ago, working nights and weekends around my full-time position at the city, I developed a groundwater mapping methodology. This is as technical as I'll make it. The standard approaches at the time for modeling subsurface water flow in northern clay-rich soils were expensive, slow, and frequently wrong in predictable ways. I had spent 14 years working in the field, and I thought I could model the problem differently. I was right. I called the framework tamarack, which is a tree that grows in northern bogs, and seemed like an appropriate name for something that was going to live in the groundwater. I published it in a small applied engineering journal. I filed a modest patent. I licensed it to 3 provincial governments in the first 2 years. In year 4, a Calgary-based environmental consulting firm bought the full licensing rights. I made enough to pay off the house in Edmonton and fund Connor's RESP with a comfortable margin. In year 7, the methodology itself was acquired by a national infrastructure firm and became the backbone of their environmental assessment division. I signed the paperwork on a Friday afternoon and took Beverly out for dinner to celebrate, because she was the only person I'd ever actually told about any of it. I didn't side. I didn't tell Connor because he was 9 years old when I started, and I didn't tell children about professional projects. In the same way, I didn't explain mortgage amortization at the dinner table. By the time he was old enough to understand it, I had developed the habit of not talking about it. And then that habit calcified, the way habits do, until it became not a decision at all but simply a fact of how I lived. I didn't need Connor to know. I didn't need anyone to know. The work existed. It did what it was supposed to do. That was enough. What I did not know, sitting at that dinner table in Halifax with my water glass and my quiet, and my daughter of a name that hadn't been said aloud, was that a man named Roland Achibi was sitting directly behind me. Roland was Senior Director of the Federal Environmental Assessment Division, which had been using tamarack-derived protocols in northern infrastructure projects for the past 9 years. He had recognized the name on the seating card in front of me. Lawrence Beaumont, the moment he sat down, because it was the name on the original patent documentation he'd reviewed when his division first adopted the framework. He'd been sitting with it all evening, deciding whether to say something. When Connor's speech ended, Roland put down his fork. I heard his chair push back. He walked to the front of the room with the unhurried ease of a man who has stood in front of rooms before and has decided he has something to say. The faculty moderator looked at him questioningly. He leaned in and said something brief. She handed him the microphone. "I apologize for stepping outside the program," Roland said. The room settled immediately. There was something in his register, calm and precise, that made spaces go quiet. "My name is Roland Achibi. I'm the Senior Director of Environmental Assessment with Infrastructure Canada. I had planned to simply enjoy the dinner and congratulate the graduates, which I've done and mean genuinely." A pause. "But I've been sitting behind a man all evening whose name I recognized when I sat down, and I find I can't leave without saying something." Still, completely still. 22 years ago. Roland continued. "A methodology called Tamarack was introduced into environmental engineering practice in this country. I want to be accurate about this because I've lived inside this work professionally for nearly a decade. Tamarack changed baseline for subsurface groundwaters assessment in northern clay belt environments. The standard approaches before it were expensive and had predictable failure modes. Tamarack addressed those failure modes systematically from the ground up." He paused, and something in his expression shifted. "Not performance, just precision. My division uses Tamarack-derived protocols in every northern infrastructure project we run. We have used them for 9 consecutive years. We have assessed billions of dollars in public infrastructure through a framework that one engineer developed on his own time while holding a full-time municipal position." The room was completely quiet. "That engineer," Roland said, "is sitting at table 7. His name is Lawrence Beaumont. He is the father of the graduate we just celebrated." 300 heads turned. I kept my eyes on the tablecloth for 2 seconds. Then I made myself look up. "I want to say this directly," Roland continued, his voice even and unhurried. "I have worked with engineers who needed their names on everything they built. I have worked with researchers who required an audience for every development. Lawrence Beaumont published 1 paper, filed 1 patent, and then apparently went back to work and never mentioned it again." A beat. He looked at me steadily. "What Tamarack accomplished in the field is significant. The fact that the man who built it is sitting here tonight having apparently not mentioned it to the people at this table is," he stopped, "shows the next word carefully, remarkable, and worth saying out loud." He set the microphone down. The applause started at the table, nearest the front, and moved backward through the room. My sister Beverly did not applaud. She made a sound I can only describe as a long, slow exhale of a woman who has been holding something for decades and has just been permitted to put it down. Irene pressed her forehead against my shoulder for a moment and stayed there. When she lifted her head, her face was completely composed, but her eyes were bright. "I told you," she said quietly, under the noise. "You didn't know about Tamarack," I said. "I didn't need to," she said. I looked at Connor. He was sitting at the head table, where the graduating students had been positioned. Champagne glass suspended at an angle about 6 inches from where it had started. The color had left his face in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child with the flu. He was doing the mathematics. I could see it from across the room. The resp, the semester transfers, the careful explanations he'd given me in the patient voice of a man briefing someone who might not follow. Tamarack, the patent, the federal protocols, his supervisors in his graduate program who had been using a framework he'd never thought to ask his father about. He looked at me. I gave him a small nod. Not forgiveness, not everything's fine. Just, "I see you, I'm still here." People came to the table. Roland himself came over briefly, hand extended, and we shook hands like men who had just confirmed something they both already understood. He told me the work had been foundational. I told him I was glad it had held up. He said it had done considerably more than hold up, and that if I ever wanted to consult on the next generation of protocols, the conversation was available. I thanked him and meant it. Faculty came over, colleagues of Connor's who looked at me differently now, with that specific recalibration that happens in a room when context changes. Beverly squeezed my arm without speaking. I knew what she wasn't saying, and she knew I knew. About 15 minutes after Roland sat back down, Connor appeared beside my chair. I looked up. He stood there with the careful posture of a man who has rehearsed an approach and has now arrived at the moment and found it harder than the rehearsal. His composure, which had been professional and seamless all weekend, had cracked. Not dramatically. He wasn't the type. But the cracks were there, around his eyes in the particular stillness of his jaw. "Dad," he said. I waited. "I didn't know about Tamarack." "I know you didn't. Why didn't you?" He stopped. Started again. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Because it was mine," I said. "And I didn't need you to have an opinion about it." He absorbed that. "I should have said your name tonight," he said. "I know that. I knew it when I was writing the speech." "And," he exhaled, "and I told myself you wouldn't mind." "That," I said quietly, "is a thing you told yourself because it was convenient, not because you believed it." His jaw tightened. "Dad, I'm sorry," I genuinely, "Connor." I kept my voice level. Even. The voice I used when I meant every syllable. "You stood at a microphone in a room full of your peers and your faculty, at a dinner that I flew across the country to attend, having paid 2 years of your expenses. And you thanked your mother. You thanked Jeffrey. You thanked your cohort. And then you raised a glass." I paused. "You did not leave my name out by accident. You left it out because somewhere you have decided I'm the kind of father you're a little embarrassed by. Tonight you just let that decision show." Something moved across his face. Not anger. Something more uncomfortable than anger. "That's not." He stopped. "That's not fair. Which part of it isn't accurate?" He didn't answer. "I love you," I said. "That's not in question. But you're going to have to sit with what happened tonight for a while before we talk about where we go from here. Are you?" His voice dropped. "Are you saying you can't forgive me?" I looked at my son. At the gown he was still wearing. At the room behind him full of his colleagues. At the waterfront visible through the windows in the late June light. "I'm saying I won't do it tonight," I said. "Not because I'm punishing you. Because it isn't real yet. You're sorry, because 300 people just watched Roland Achabe explain who I am. If the room had stayed quiet, you'd have driven to the airport tomorrow without mentioning it. We both know that." The truth of it landed on his face the way truth lands when you've been waiting for it without knowing you were waiting for it. "Dad, enjoy the rest of your evening," I said. "You've worked hard and the degree is real and that matters. Irene and I are flying back Monday. We'll talk when you're ready to have a different kind of conversation." I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked back to where Irene was waiting by the edge of the room. She handed me my coffee, because somehow she had found me a coffee. "How did it go?" she said. "About how you'd expect." She considered this. "Did you say what you needed to say?" "Yeah, good." She drank her wine. We flew home Monday morning. The flight was smooth. I had the window seat. Edmonton appeared below us in the particular grid of a prairie city, flat, deliberate, enormous in its orderly sprawl, and I felt something that I could only describe as a kind of quiet. Not relief. Not satisfaction exactly. Just the particular absence of weight that comes when you've put something down that you've been carrying longer than you realized. Connor called 3 days after we landed. I watched the phone for a long moment and then let it go to voicemail. He called again on the Sunday. Then twice the following week. I didn't delete the messages. I didn't listen to them either, not right away. I went to work. I ate my eggs in the morning. Irene and I watched the game on Saturday. She fell asleep before the third period, and I put a blanket over her and sat in the quiet house with the city dark outside and the sound of the furnace and nothing else. Beverly called on a Thursday in July, her voice doing the thing it does when she's being deliberately casual about something she cares about deeply. "He called me," she said. "I figured he would. He wanted me to talk to you." "I know. I told him the same thing I'd tell anyone in this situation." She paused. "That Lawrence Beaumont does things in his own time and not a minute before. What did he say?" "He cried," Beverly said, which is the correct response. I sat with that. "He'll get there," she said. "Or he won't. But that's not your work to do." She was right, as she usually is. In October, I listened to the voicemails. I sat in the Silverado in the driveway with the engine off and the Tim Hortons mug cold in the cup holder, and I went through them in order. The early ones were careful, measured. the cadence of a man who had organized his thoughts. Dad, I know I made a mistake. I want to explain. I want to talk when you're ready. The right words in the right order. Correct, but assembled. The later ones were different. The one from late July. I've been thinking about what you said, about knowing when I was writing the speech. And I keep trying to tell myself I didn't fully realize what I was doing. But I think you were right. I think I told myself it was fine because I wanted it to be fine. And that's not the same thing. The one from September, 9 weeks after Halifax. I talked to Jeffrey last week. He told me he didn't know about Tamarack either. I asked him what he thought. He said, and this is the part that has been sitting with me. He said, your father sounds like someone worth knowing. From Jeffrey, that's the one that I can't shake. The last one, from 2 weeks before October, I'm not calling to ask you to do anything. I understand if the answer is still no. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry that I needed 300 people in Roland Chibi to show me something I should have already known. That's on me, not on you. You didn't owe me that knowledge. I just wish I'd looked harder for it myself. I sat in the Silverado for a long time after the last one ended. Then I put the truck in gear, pulled into the driveway, went inside and had dinner with Irene. I didn't call him back. Not that week. Not that month. In November, Roland reached out. Not about a job, just to talk. He'd been thinking about the second generation of protocols, he said. There were conversations happening internally about updating the Northern Assessment Framework, and my name had come up naturally in those conversations. Not from him, but from the engineers who'd spent years working inside Tamarack and had specific questions that only the original designer could probably answer. We talked for an hour. It was the best professional conversation I'd had in years, and I'd had some good ones. Irene asked me afterward what I was thinking. Nothing specific, I said. She looked at me in the way she has of looking at me when she thinks I'm being imprecise. You're thinking about Connor. I'm always thinking about Connor. That's not the same as calling him. No, I said. It's not. She went back to her book. In February, I listened to the last voicemail again. Just the one. Sitting in the truck, in the parking lot of the arena, after a recreational hockey game I'd been playing in since I was 41. Still in my skates, the way I sometimes sat in the quiet of my own company to think clearly. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry that I needed 300 people in Roland Achibi to show me something I should have already known. I sat with that for a while. Then I drove home, showered, ate the leftover soup Irene had made, and went to bed. I still haven't called him back. Not yet. Maybe next month. Maybe in the spring. I genuinely don't know, and for once in my life, not knowing doesn't bother me. What I know is this. Forgiveness isn't something you produce on demand because someone is ready to receive it. It isn't a thing you perform for the room. It comes when it comes, at the pace it comes, on no one's schedule but its own. I have Irene, who is the most sensible person I know and makes a good soup. I have Beverly, who is usually right and has the decency to be right as briefly as possible. I have the Silverado, which starts every morning without drama and has never once asked me to be impressed by it. And I have Tamarack, still running quietly, inside 9 years of infrastructure assessment across this country, doing exactly what it was built to do, not asking for recognition, not requiring an audience, just working. Some men need the room to know what they've built. I just needed it to work. Everything else has always been secondary to that, and I expect it always will be. If you found something in this story worth sitting with, hit like and subscribe. There are more stories where this one came from, and they're all about the same thing, even when they seem to be about something else.